Well, good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. Today, we're going to talk about cloud storage and show a little bit about Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive. Here, I am sharing some location where you can find a previous recording of this talk. Lindsay Tronowski, who is a Microsoft consultant, did this talk back in June of 21, but we're going to go over some of that, but then give you an update on some changes that occurred since last June. So today's outline you can find at this bit.ly link. So you can go to that, and I'm going to share it here on my screen. But this is the outline we're going to use from Lindsay's. We asked her, and she allowed us to share this link. So here I have the bit.ly link open, and as you can see, it's from last June. Here's Lindsay's information you can find in there. And I'm just going to scroll through here. I'm not going to go over what is OneDrive. We'll talk about that. But as you go through this, the University of Missouri does get 5 terabytes of storage with its OneDrive. And here's some helpful resources that Lindsay has included that you can click on and go to those links. As you can see, I'm scrolling down through this, but you can come down here to the bottom right, click on this, and jump right to a section that Lindsay has set up. Here you can also click on these little links and scroll through some benefits of OneDrive. Here's where she talks about SharePoint and its resources, and as well as Teams and some of that resources. But what do we want to focus on today is kind of the difference between OneDrive, Teams, and SharePoint, and how each of them are unique in using each of them. So when we talk about OneDrive, when we talk about that type of cloud storage, those are your individual documents, your private files, maybe that you might work on your desktop, and then you can share that out with other people, but OneDrive for Business are your individual files. Whereas when you get into Teams and storing files on Teams, those files are usually meant for a group or a team collaboration. And as we'll see, anytime you create a team, the big brother of, you might say, of Teams is SharePoint. So on the back end of Team, when you create a team, you actually get a SharePoint site where all the files are stored. But Teams allows you to add applications. Like here, you'll see the different Office products, and you can add other applications, plus you can post messages and do a lot of collaboration within Teams. So it's a central hub for communication and collaboration. But then again, on the back end, you'll get a SharePoint site where your documents will be saved, and we'll see that. So let me just scroll on down a little bit more here. OneDrive, again, that is one person. That's an individual storage. And Lindsay had put down here in the H drive. So you might have a file server where some people might use the H drive. We used to use a W drive, but you can think of that as your private storage. A team is, when you use Teams, you work with a team of maybe up to 50 to 100 people. Once you get out bigger, organization-wide, you might look into using SharePoint to collaborate. But Teams is again, the central hub for teamwork where you can collaborate and share files. And SharePoint is on the back end of Teams, but you can make an intranet, maybe even within your department or within the university. By default, if you set up a SharePoint site, you're able to share information across the whole organization, which is the University of Missouri. So that's kind of the difference between these three cloud storages. Again, individual data that you share within a group or a team, and then maybe across your organization or maybe at least your department or college. And if you scroll on down this outline that I shared, you can see what each is great for doing. Here it says Teams can be public. You'll need special permission to do that. Most teams across the university by default are set to private. Again, it just kind of explains what it's great for and sharing and control access. And again, at the bottom, here's some more great resources. It's being shared, collaborating on each. How should you store your files? And then additionally, there's some training and resources here at the bottom of this bit.ly link that I've shared out. Having said all that, we are going to jump right into the demos of each, okay? And kind of bring you updated on some changes that have occurred. On OneDrive, and we do have a OneDrive training. If you're really not familiar with OneDrive or Teams or SharePoint, we have special training just for those topics. So be sure to hit those up. So with OneDrive, the one thing that you want to check and make sure you have set, because again, this is my individual OneDrive. If I right click on this, I want to go to settings. And one thing I want to make sure is that this files on demand is selected. And by default, I think the university has that set by default. So this will ensure that any files that's out in the cloud will sync down to your local machine when you open it. So like this account management process, this status indicates that it's in the cloud and I don't have a copy on my machine. Whereas the check mark here means it's on my machine as well. And it's always being synced. But if I open this file now, so it opens up that document, but you'll see now it has a copy on my machine. So it's a file on demand. As soon as I open it, it creates that link. And now I can work offline and still have access to that file. Another thing I want to point out in OneDrive that you'll want to check, if I go again to settings, some people want to keep a lot of data because you get, like I mentioned, you get 5 terabytes. So you get a lot of storage out in the cloud. You don't get as much on your hard drive. Like you might have a half a terabyte, but you get 10 times the storage in that case in the cloud. So maybe you have some videos or data in the cloud that you don't want to sync to your local machine and take up all your space. So under the account, here it says OneDrive, University of Missouri. I can choose my folders. This is where I can decide, hey, these are the files that I want to sync or folders. But let's say that I have this data, and this data is large, like here's 118 gig, and maybe I don't want to sync that down. If I deselect that, that folder will no longer show up in my file explorer here. The one called Greg Data. It'll take a little while to refresh, but those files, that listing will no longer show here, but it'll still be in the cloud, okay? And it looks like that is still activated, and I'll add that back later. That is if you want to just leave files in the cloud and then not back to your local machine. The last item that I wanted to show you, a change from OneDrive, is they have asked where, when we do recordings, say in Teams, where are those files stored and when do they expire? Because that's something that campus or that Microsoft is changing, is the expiration date of recordings. So if you make a Teams recording, not within a channel, but just a regular recording, it'll show up in your recordings folder. And here I did a recording yesterday of OneDrive training. So to see when that actually expires or to set that, we go out to OneDrive Online. And you can do that by viewing online here or just go to office.com. So I'm going to go out to my website and I'll have to log in. Okay, so again, when I go down to my recordings, I can find my recordings here. Now the one that I did yesterday, I can pick out any of these recordings. If I select that, and if I go down to details, it'll tell me that there's no expiration on this. But if campus or Microsoft actually sets a date, you could come in here and set that back to no expiration. So there might be a default eventually when these recordings might be set. And if there's a recording that you need, you can come back in here and just change that expiration date. Okay. So again, just to reiterate, OneDrive is your individual private storage. When I came out to office.com, you can come out here to OneDrive and find your files. And this is actually where all your files are stored. And then you determine which ones you want to sync back to your computer. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and jump into Teams. Now on Teams, when you create a team site, when you create a team, you automatically get a SharePoint site. So behind every team that's created is a SharePoint site. So if I go to, for example, this team, and I'll pick any what's called a channel down. Each of these subgroups is called a channel. So when I go to the Files tab of that, here it says Open in SharePoint. So typically, when you have your files for a team, each channel has its own files section. So that's actually a separate folder in SharePoint, and let me just show you that. So if I go to the files of this channel, this kind of subgroup of a team, and I say Open in SharePoint, let's just see what that looks like. Here I can see this is my team name, and this is the channel that I'm in. But if I go back to the previous folder, I can see my other channels in here. Now you can, as you can see, create other folders by saying New Folder, and these won't show up in the team, but they will be out on the SharePoint site. So you can add to your team on SharePoint and have it not show up if you wish. Kind of some hidden channels, or sorry, hidden folders. But again, each channel that you create is actually just a folder on SharePoint. And one thing you can do out here, let's say, and I don't want to get too far ahead, but you might have some files or folders within your team. By default, everybody on your team can see these folders and they can collaborate and make changes, edits. But you might have a file or a folder where you don't want everybody on your team to have access to. You could come in here and pick out, let me go into HR, and maybe I don't want everybody to see this file. I can click on that, and the three dots beside it here, I can say Manage Access for that file. Let me select a folder here because I've made changes there. So if I click the Edit Files, and I say Manage Access, sorry, these are bad examples because I've made some changes. Let me just go to the General channel. So by default, you can see the owners, of course, owners of the channel, the visitors of your team, they can edit. So they can view. If I drop this down, it says these people can view the files in the general channel. And the members, if I drop that down, it says they can edit. So I can change their rights. I can also stop sharing completely with that group. So that's just a little extra that you can do there within the SharePoint site that you can't do on Teams. Because again, by default, in Teams, everybody has access to collaborate and visitors can view that. Another thing I want to point out here, some people use private channels. So back here, the name of this private channel is called private. So if I look through here, I will notice that I cannot see that private channel from this SharePoint site. I will actually have to go to this private channel if I want to look at that SharePoint site for this channel, is go to the files and open in SharePoint. So from here I can see that I'm in that private channel and I can only see those files. Likewise, if I go back to documents, I only see the private channel. I can't see all the other channels. So that just shows in order to see the files in here, you have to be a member of that private channel. So, and again, I just want to mention that every channel within a team has its own file section, which is just a channel in SharePoint. The last thing I wanted to show you here within Teams is one thing that they've changed. Let's say that I'm typing a post to somebody and I want to upload a file to share with this channel. So if I'm in a new conversation, I want to upload a file from my OneDrive. In the past, when you've done this, you only had the option to upload a copy. But now what you have, let me just say this Word document. I'm going to upload that, but it says, do you want to upload a copy? Meaning I will keep the original in my OneDrive, but it'll put a copy out in the team so the team can collaborate on that. So there's going to be two separate copies of that document. Or I could share a link and have the original, then work off the original in my OneDrive. So if I say share a link, now below it, it says people in this team with the link can view the document that resides in my OneDrive. So I now have one copy that I control. I can also use that drop arrow, and I can have more options than that, where I can give them edit access, and I can also do specific people maybe in this team. So now you have more options if you choose to attach a file from your OneDrive into a team. Okay. The other thing I want to show you within Teams, the last thing, is on the Files tab. In case you didn't know, this is kind of the me bar. So this is my navigation bar. So my team doesn't see this. My team sees whatever is over here. So my team will see this, and this is kind of the we. So the me and the we. So if I look at my files, like I said, Teams is kind of the central hub. So they try to get everything that you have access to for M365 accessible from within Teams. So when I click on recent documents, it will show me all my documents that I worked on recently, not only in OneDrive, but also under my SharePoint site. So these are all my files that I worked on recently. You can also, of course, just focus on your team files, and it'll show you those locations, as well as your OneDrive. So if you go to your Files tab, you can see all your Teams, your OneDrive files, and all your recent files. Is a nice place to find it, because sometimes as you get really involved, you may not remember where you were just working on a document. So recent is a good place under Files to find those. The final thing I want to touch on today, of course, is SharePoint. And again, this is kind of the big brother of everything. Everything is stored, especially in Teams, on SharePoint, and then you can change the rights if you need to, and you can add to information. So let's look at that. So you can always, again, go to Teams, go to a file, and go out to SharePoint, or you can just go out to office.com, and when you go out to office.com and log in with your credentials, you will go to, this is office.com, I logged in, and it will look like this. On the left side, of course, is your navigation bar, where we could find, again, OneDrive, and you can find Teams. But let's look at SharePoint now. So if I click on SharePoint, this is what the SharePoint site will come up like. And I can see all my SharePoint sites and teams that I have access to. Most of them are teams because, again, when you create a team, it associated with the SharePoint site. So I can simply come out here and go to my site associated with that team, and it will look like this by default. Again, my home, it'll have, here's all my documents, which are my channels. So I could, again, come out here to my documents like we've seen before, see my channels in any other folders, and I can assign rights to those channels, manage access. But this home directory, this home view, you could actually modify this. And let me show you what that could look like. If I go back to my SharePoint, I've done this with my M365 training site. So now my team, when they come out here to SharePoint, you can make it maybe more appealing and maybe geared toward your group. So instead of that standard site, I have this, and I have other information for other recordings from Lindsay. I have some training things, some examples that people can learn from. So this is just kind of the home page. And if people come out here, they like it, they can click on this star here and follow that. What happens when they follow that is when I go to my OneDrive now, let me go back out here to OneDrive. This quick access, it'll show up right here. So when I'm back on my OneDrive, I can easily get to my sites that I have said, hey, I want to follow those. So if I click on this, these are my files, and then that I can get access to those files from my OneDrive. And so that's the benefit of a quick access, is get to the files of those channels, that you want access to. Okay, let me get back to SharePoint. One thing that people have found really beneficial, they always enjoy working out of this, especially on a Windows machine, and even on a Mac, you can use your Finder. On a Windows, they're used to using File Explorer to find all their files, right? We're used to coming down here and getting your drive letters. Well, OneDrive is in here, but they also would like to have an easy way to get to your files that's stored in SharePoint or Teams, okay? An easy way to do that is, let's say that I'm in a team. I'll start with the team. It's the same thing in SharePoint, but let me just get to my team. So if I'm in a team and I'm like, well, I would like to get to these files, these recordings, pre-recorded videos. I like to get to these files, but I want to get it to it from my OneDrive. What I would do is open up in SharePoint, and I'm in this folder now. There's an option here to add a shortcut to OneDrive. It's this pre-recorded video. So if I add that shortcut, you'll see it's saying it's pre-recorded videos now has been added to OneDrive. So what I could do then is come out to my OneDrive, give it a little bit, but you'll see that there will be a pre-recorded videos right here. Most of the folders just look like a manila folder, but there's some that have a little link. And what that means is that is linked back to a SharePoint or a Teams folder. So if I click on that now, I have easy access, and I can work within OneDrive and access Teams. So this is a way that if you have a Word document open, you start a Word document, this is a way that you can save it directly to Teams, okay? And I can always come down here and rename that shortcut as well. But let's say now I no longer want that shortcut. I don't want to delete it because it might delete the files, but if you right-click on it, here's an option to remove the shortcut, okay? And the last thing I want to show you is, let me see if we have enough time here. It's like we have a couple minutes. One thing that we learn in our OneDrive training, I've talked about, if you have a file or a folder that you always want on your machine, because let's say you might be traveling, so you might want to put all the files you'll need in a folder. You want to make sure that that folder is always available to you. You could select a folder, but I'm going to do a file in this case. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say always keep on this device. What that's going to do is change that to a dark green, so no matter what, when I'm traveling, that file is always going to be on my machine, which is important if I don't have internet connection. So that guarantees it's always on here. Then when you make your changes and connect back to the internet, that file will always sync. That file will sync back to the internet. And then if you no longer need it on your machine, I can right click on it. I can click on free up space and it'll put it back in the cloud. But regardless, it's always in the cloud. So we're never going to lose it from there. And again, you can get to the cloud just by going to view online or just go to office.com, because that's where everything, that is where everything is stored. Okay. So just as a recap, the last couple minutes, we have OneDrive, which is your individual private storage. You have a team location where you can collaborate and chat and post things and use applications, but that data is stored into SharePoint. And then SharePoint, not only does it host the team files, but you can actually expand that to more of an intranet site. It's like an internet, but it's just within the University of Missouri or within your college or your department. So if you guys have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me or just reach out to the MU DoIT training at umsystem.edu.